Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Nakao, publisher of Continuity Insights, and welcome to our webinar, a review of work from home strategies pre, during, and post-pandemic, sponsored by SAI 360. For more than 25 years, SAI 360 has helped organizations across the globe manage risk, create trust, and achieve business resilience. To learn more, please visit sai360.com. The ongoing pandemic crisis has clearly challenged us in ways we've never seen before. While moving an entire workforce from offices to remote environments would normally involve great preparation and planning, this was not an option in 2020. And then how will this new work environment be defined going forward? In July and August of this year, SAI 360 and Continuity Insights embarked on a project to learn more about this shift to work from home. The study reviewed work from home scenarios within organizations before, during, and as organizations begin to reopen. The project also looked at the status and/or changes to work area recovery plans and strategies going forward. And lastly, we explored the many work from home issues that were most concerning to both employees and employers. So before we get started, just a few review items on how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit questions by typing into the question pane of your control panel. You may submit questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address as many as we can at the end of the webinar. If you feel your question may require a bit more detail than can be addressed here, be sure to email our panelists so they can respond to you directly, and their contact information will be shown at the end of this presentation. Today's webinar will also be recorded for on-demand viewing and sharing with your colleagues. You will be emailed the on-demand link as well as a link to download the work from home PDF. So let's get started. We are very pleased to have assembled an impressive group of industry veterans to lead this discussion. I'd like to introduce them now. Michael Allman is the Director, Organization Resilience Global Security Risk Services at Citrix Inc. He has more than 20 years of experience, including leadership and execution in the areas of business recovery strategy, impact analysis, risk management, DR planning, crisis incident management, metrics, and audit regulation compliance. His experience includes a successful record of building enterprise business continuity programs and leading global teams through the end-to-end BC lifecycle. Tim Matthews is the Executive Director, Enterprise Resiliency at Educational Testing Service. Tim has led ETS through its resilience journey, culminating in certification to the ISO 22301 Business Continuity Standard and conformity to the Department of Homeland Security's PS-PREC. Tim holds a Doctor of Science in Civil Security Leadership, Management, and Policy from NJCU and undergraduate and graduate degrees from Rider University. Dr. Matthews is also an adjunct professor at Rider University in Business Strategy, Policy, and Enterprise Resilience and Master of Homeland Security programs. Mark Carroll is Senior Vice President, Business Risk Officer and Income Research and Management, a fixed income investment advisor in Boston. Mark has more than 35 years of experience in business continuity, risk management, and information technology in a variety of diverse environments and disciplines. Previously, he held senior risk and business continuity positions with Fidelity, Procter & Gamble, Gillette, and Biogen. He is the founder and serves as adjunct faculty for the graduate degree program in business continuity at Boston University. Howard Manella is the managing principal at Alternative Resiliency Services Corp., a US-based next-gen consultancy focusing on resiliency, continuity, crisis risk, security, and related domains. His clients include software as a service, card processing, banking, and others, initiating successful programs across the US, Canada, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and India. He is the former principal resiliency strategist for Expedia, where he stood up their global business continuity program. And prior to Expedia, he was the senior delivery manager for boutique BCDR consultancy. Now on to the presentation. Please join me in welcoming Michael, Mark, Tim, and Howard. So we'll begin this webinar by asking the panelists to share their thoughts to three compelling questions. So our first question is, what was the one finding from the report that surprised you the most? So Michael, why don't you lead us off on this question?
Sure. To me, the most surprising thing was that I believe it was more than 80% of the people who took the survey did not have plans to significantly change the real estate footprint. Um, it's interesting because in the evaluations and things that we've done, we came up with a lot of metrics, a lot of them really, surrounding around monetary value and bang for the buck that you get. So the cost of real estate in general, it's not getting any cheaper anywhere. So lowering that footprint is definitely going to save you some money. But in addition to that, there's things inside of the real estate and the buildings as well. Just local resources costs like audio video equipment, furniture, insurance associated with keeping sites, and especially the smaller and less critical and less occupied sites. In fact, Citrix is going through an activity now to see how we can benefit from subleasing some of the floors and some of the bigger sites that we may have, because we did a bit of an assessment during the pandemic just to kind of go back in time and look and see how many people were coming to the sites anyway. How many seats do we have in them? Or are we really kind of oversizing everything? And we found that we are a company that provides products and services to allow people to work from anywhere through any device. So it may be a little bit different from my perspective, but we have the ability to have people work a lot more remotely than we do. So we're looking a lot closer at not having as many facilities and things that we have for the value that we get from not doing that monetarily, but also from the freedom that some of our employees have given, they've expressed from being able to work remotely. One last piece of it too is the amount of money that our employees and our leadership uses to travel to and from a lot of these sites as well. So if we don't have quite as many sites, it's also going to save us a little bit of money at the end of the day too. So that was the most surprising thing, is no significant change to the footprint.
I would tend to agree, Michael. And the percentage of respondents that are not looking at changes to their alternate work area recovery strategy, I mean, that's kind of a legacy approach, and COVID has kind of put a highlight on how that might not be as necessary as it used to be. I think that was just a continuing trend, and it just hockey sticked up. So yeah, it's kind of, there's a lingering inertia to move past the old way of thinking. And I think that the employees are going to kind of take the lead on that. Your comment about office facilities having other collateral damage, so to speak, and the furnishings and infrastructure, the downtowns where these companies are located, there's also going to be a significant and not really talked about collateral damage. If we're not all commuting into Boston or New York or whatever, we're not going out to lunch. We're not going to happy hour. We're not window shopping for Christmas. We're window shopping. We're doing all that from here, and that's going to significantly change the character and the culture of urban life.
Mark or Jim?
I'm sorry. If I can take us on a different direction, what shocked me was the level of what was referred to as limited teamwork and collaboration. Over half, 56% of the respondents came back and said that was a concern. And that was a real surprise to me, because I didn't see that as a concern. I saw collaboration from the get-go as being one of the fortes for all of this happening, groups coming together and really getting to leverage collaboration that they've done in the past in the office. But the other side of it is this: the dichotomy I saw, and it really threw me off, and I can't reconcile these two things, is the role of management leadership was not a concern. The total was 17%. And I saw management leadership as the basis for that collaboration and teamwork. So if you're not concerned about management leadership in activity, and you are concerned about individual collaboration and teamwork, how do you reconcile those two? It just threw me right off, because it's almost like A and not A, and they were like inconsistent. That's just something I couldn't get. I still can't reconcile it in my head.
Yeah, but Mark, you're saying that you don't think collaboration is an issue. So much of work gets accomplished over a coffee in a break room, over a beer at the bar, after work. So much so much collaboration happens just by walking down to somebody's office and saying, hey, let's step outside for 10 minutes and just chat about this and figure it out. And that's not happening. Do you think that that's it sounds like you're not on board with that?
Well, Howard, I would say it this way. I think you're exactly right. That's the activity that goes on naturally. But I think in this real situation that we're facing and have been facing for almost 2 years now, there's a much more intense focus on making sure there's that teamwork and collaboration. It's not a walk down the hallway where we bump into each other anymore, but it's a need to fill that gap actively through, ongoing teamwork and collaboration through the tools that we have. So professionals will recognize that they don't get a chance to walk the halls and bump into people, and management by walking around is effectively gone. So the question becomes, how do you fill that? And I think people are actively acknowledging the need to fill that, and as a result, leveraging what they have in place in terms of tools, technology, sessions like this to make sure it does happen.
Fair enough.
Tim?
Well, I agree with most of what everyone said here. I think, what I see is some of the responses indicate to me there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. And this thing has been dragging out much longer. If we all go back to when it started, people were putting reentry plans together for 30, 60, 90 days out. And that just kept, that goalpost kept slipping and moving further into the future. In fact, today, many organizations still don't have concrete reentry dates or reentry plans. So I think what I'm seeing is a lot of uncertainty. And with that, we're seeing sort of a new normal sort of burn into itself here. We are at now working in the way we are working. So any change, we are sort of becoming full of inertia now to change into a new model because we've now sort of locked in to this remote model. And to the point about walking around, to me, culture is what's most at risk here for organizations. The culture is really about what people are how they engage one another and what the norms are in the organization. And when you're in teams in this kind of two-dimensional way, it's hard to really to really establish culture. I see it with new people. New people that join in to an organization. They don't know the players. They don't know the buildings. They don't know the small references made to the way things used to be. So I see the longer we're in this, the more uncertainty that we're actually getting to. And our job in business continuity is to try to plan for some sort of certainty, have a plan to get back to normal. And it's challenging to do when we don't know what that normal will be.
All right. Any other thoughts? Are we ready to move to the next question? Okay. Next question. Was there one particular finding or result from the report that reaffirmed an opinion of yours? So Mark, why don't you lead us off on this one?
Yeah, Bob, the one thing that I saw was 43% of the people that responded came back and said the separation of personal and professional life is an issue in the go forward environment. And that was not a surprise at all. And I go back to the days, where, you put the pen down at 5 o'clock, but you carried a beeper at night, and often people were paid off hours for that. Now, we set the clock ahead to, maybe 5 or 7 years ago, maybe a little longer, and we, started talking about work-life balance, which is a whole different dichotomy. Suddenly you want your time to yourself, you want your space, and there's got to be a balance there. Well, that balance, went down the tubes a little bit about 2 years ago, and now people are, jumping on email at 4 in the morning and having calls at night, etc. And that's not a surprise. We've come to a situation where we can't differentiate. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward, which is how do you go back to, that work-life balance dynamic when you've only got one place and you're in the same room, either going to work or in a conference like this, or, playing video games on your own time, all in the same chair on the same unit. It's just incredible. So I think that's the thing that really didn't surprise me at all, because it's what I'm living with, and it's what everybody else I think is living with.
Yeah, I guess I'll say that I agree with everything you said. I almost wish I would have picked that one out of a hat, because I really agree with what you said. But the question about the status of your work area recovery strategies and contractual agreements and whatnot, I guess I took a little bit of a different tack, because I wasn't surprised at all that the people who took this survey were probably trained business continuity professionals, which generally means that you're covering a few scenarios in every one of your plans, right? And one of those is always going to be the loss of a facility. So I think we had a decent understanding, at least short term, on what that would look like and what we would plan for if we were to lose a facility. However, I think there was a learning experience. So although I'm not surprised with the answers to that, I think all of us were probably surprised. Just like with any exercise or plan activation, it's common to find shortcomings with systems, or you find out that what you assumed was not the correct thing to assume. For example, at Citrix, the onset of the pandemic, we really needed to expand some of our network bandwidth, and in some countries, specifically if it's internet-based network bandwidth expansion, that comes with a few things that you need to do as far as approvals go with the local governments and whatnot. So, we thought we knew what we needed to know when it came to losing a facility, but at the same time, we also found out that some of the things we prepped for just weren't something that we were going to be able to live with long term.
Tim or Howard?
Well, I guess I would add that, especially where I'm at up here in the Northeast, we were fairly used to having weather interruptions and people having to work from home. So, I wasn't so surprised at the swap between how many people reported prior to the pandemic, how many people worked remotely versus after the pandemic, because in a lot of areas, and we've seen it on the West Coast with fires and even in the South and everywhere, in large metropolitan areas, there's been a lot of having to work from home for short periods of time. So I guess that reaffirmed to me that we were all right in terms of at least building up those strategies and plans and enabling our organizations to have laptop technology and internet and cloud-based things so that we could effectively work from home. So, to me, that's one of the encouraging signs of this, is how smooth, relatively speaking, this actually has unfolded.
The one thing that unfortunately did not surprise me, and something I've been focused on a lot over the last 18 months, is the continuing COVID concern. A fairly large percentage of people respondents said that they have continuing concerns about health, continuing concerns about working in an office environment, being out and about. And yes, we're not over yet, but this has been a really globe-changing event and a normalcy changing event, between the continuing 25/7 or 25/8 drip messaging about COVID and all that we've seen. That continuing concern is going to be permanent. There will be people that will cover their face for the rest of their lives, and the prospects of anyone on this panel or in the audience flying an airplane without covering their face in 2024 is actually remote. So, people talk about the new normal and when we get out of this. I echo the concerns of the respondents that called this out. I don't see an exit ramp for this, and that I think is highly concerning, both from a business and a social perspective.
Yeah, and if I can respond to that, bringing that back to what Tim said also, this whole thing is a crisis, but from a continuity perspective, it's not a crisis event. We plan for a whole bunch of things. The analogy I like to use is that we planned for a football game. We did all the appropriate running, the weightlifting, all those things related to it, and they handed us a rugby ball. And we could do a whole lot of things in that rugby game that we couldn't have done had we not prepared. But it's a different game. It's a different dynamic. But all of our preparation yielded a good result, even though we didn't prepare for the event at hand.
All right, fair enough. This is a black swan in slow motion. Yeah. And the swan's not moving to Capistrano, unfortunately. There's some swallows.
Yeah. All right, anybody else, any other comments on this question? All right, we'll move on to the next one. What do you believe the new work from home environment will look like, and how does it succeed? So why don't we start with Tim on this one?
Well, thanks. I think this is a really big question, and I don't think there's any single answer. A lot of it's industry and organization and culturally driven. Many organizations made this pivot very easily because they were essentially set to do that. A lot of professional services organizations where they engage on site with clients or provide consultation, for them, this was not a big lift in order to do this. And for those organizations, I think they're just going to essentially abandon kind of the permanent sort of location and just be more of a virtual organization. For organizations that do require, meeting, I think you're going to see a lot more hybrid working, a lot more flexibility. I think the old school mentality of some senior executives where they had to see people and see them working, I think they've realized, if they're still with the game over this last 18 months, they've realized that people can work and function without me having to see them and walk by them in the hallway. So I think we're going to see a lot more hybrid. I think we're going to see a lot more flexibility, a lot more geospatial sort of staffing. Instead of hiring people within a 50-mile radius of your corporate HQ, you'll now be hiring people within hundreds of miles because there's not a requirement for them to come in. So there'll be more selective hiring of people. I think there'll be more competitive positions now because people will be applying in a lot of different places. So for me to succeed, I think it's about trust. I mean, it's about the ability to build a culture of trust that says we don't really care where you're working as long as you're getting your work done. So measuring that output is I think, going to be a new thing. It's not just, did you punch the clock? Did you show up today? Did you have a few meetings? It's now, what have you done for me? Because I know you're home. I know you're working, but I'm not. I don't have eyes on you all the time, so I don't know what you're doing. So did you deliver? So I think it's getting sort of more of a value delivery model where the people who will succeed are those people who can change and live with it. And I always think of a lot of staff that I've had work for me in the past that they just couldn't be away from the office. They were sort of political animals. They needed to be there. They felt if they weren't there, they were missing something. And these folks are lost. They're working at home and they just can't engage at the same level. So I think the individuals have to sort of accept the fact that you're now living in this world. And I think leadership has to accept the fact that people are out there working and give them the latitude to get the work done within a new constraint of time. I know myself, there's times where during the day I might need to run an errand where I wouldn't have been able to do before because I'd be commuting to an office and then there all day. Now you can say, I'll run out for 15 minutes and get this done while it's convenient and then come back. So, I think that's just the new way. It's going to be a lot more flexibility and a lot more trust.
Yeah, the point about trust, Tim, it goes two ways, unfortunately. I think one of the negative aspects of the new normal is, and we've already seen it start, is the greater adoption of what's termed tattleware. There are tools out there that get installed onto company assets that will, for example, time your email responses to see if you're responding rather than you're taking 2 hours because you have to do those errands you're talking about. There's software out there that takes random screenshots to make sure that you're not watching cat videos or whatever else, or worse, on your company asset in your own during their time. And there's even tattleware that takes random pictures to see if you're actually in front of your screen. Now that's getting pushback, but that's part of the new normal that people are going to have to deal with, either to squash it or to accept it. I think the good news, though, is that the new work from home environment, from a technology standpoint, I think is going to be trending towards being more immersive. We're seeing augmented reality, and we're seeing even gaming. I mean, I watch my son, do role-playing games, and you're totally immersed in that world. And when companies start cracking that code and saying you're going to live in our virtual reality and work here, I mean, you can walk around and tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey Mark, let's figure this out, or go to the virtual beer stand or whatnot. So I think work from home in the metaverse is going to be have a lot more positives, but a lot more risk than the work from the three-dimensional world that we live in now.
If I could jump in here as a very senior person in the mix, that title reckons back to the 1960s, bed checks of welfare environment, where they would chase around and find out that, are you really living alone? Do you have somebody there? And they would do bed checks. A horrific situation. But to Tim's point, I think this is also the death of the Eddie Haskells. And by that, I mean, if you're walking around the office slapping backs and kissing babies and not getting your job done, you're in trouble. And older people will remember that reference, because Eddie Haskell was a character years ago in a comedy show. But what I think is important, really important, is that, to your point, now it's management's job to identify what success criteria is, and to identify what the workload is, and to deal with metrics and numerics and lay work out properly, or have work laid out properly in such a way that we all know what that success means, okay? I think in terms of the employee, there's a critical success factor here, which is being able to provide an environment where people can adapt, where people can come in on their own terms, et cetera. I saw a commercial the other day for Amazon, and it was really interesting. It showed a whole bunch of people putting up restrictions on how they could work. Well, I could only work on 2 days a week. I've only got 2 hours here, et cetera. And the Amazon ad said, and we can accommodate all of that. Now, that's probably a little bit unreasonable in the normal environment, but it's going to be really, really interesting to watch how organizations at a minimum need to adapt. They may not succeed, but they will not succeed if they can't adapt. Now, the other side of it is, too, in different environments, you've got what I'll call worlds colliding. And that is, for example, where you've got a factory or a warehousing environment that requires feet on the floor, that requires hands in the office, but at the same time has an office environment that sits on the other end that doesn't require it. How will management reconcile those two things when you've got people who can work from home and have that flexibility, and others whose job just simply doesn't allow it? That's going to be a real tricky dynamic for organizations that have to deal with that duality.
Yeah, that is. So Tim mentioned when he was first talking about this, the hybrid model, and I don't know, Tim, if you were speaking about what I'm going to mention here, but as far as the environments at home, I won't touch on that too much. I mean, I think we all know that there's, for full-time remote employees, there's going to be all kinds of challenges and things to fix with security and things like that, and even the tattleware we were talking about. But from my perspective, at least at Citrix right now, for the last 6 months or so, we've started a program that was really called Space to Succeed. And what we're trying to do is not really go down the path of everybody needs to be remote, but how do we get to a point where most people are more of a hybrid model? And by hybrid, I mean they're in the office some and they're at home some. And there's no 1 day equals hybrid or 4 days equals hybrid. But it really boils down to our challenges. How do we get people in the seats that they either need to be in or want to be in the office? And we've developed some internal applications that have floor plan overlays, and seats are, to help you deal with social distancing. There's, these seats rotate every other day and have to sit in between them. But the people have to be able to come in and do something like book the seat in advance. And how far in advance can you do that? How do teams that need to be in close proximity to one another ensure that the seats that they booked are going to be available to be next to one another, instead of, you can't have one guy on the 3rd floor and one guy on the 5th floor. It's not going to work that way. How do you provide a secure seat for someone like legal or audit, or someone who is going to be having sensitive information that they speak about that other people around them can't hear? And you have to resolve the requirements for jobs that have special equipment and things. Your tech supports or customer services of the world may not be on your digital type of phone line. They may be still tied to a PBX or something that has work queuing or phone call queuing. And so, things like that, to me, will be the future of not really work from home. I think it'll be more of a hybrid work is what most companies will settle on, in my opinion.
If I could just jump in one more time and just, I've been in technology all of my career, and I just have so much confidence in entrepreneurs and technology. If you just look at a couple of things that are big trends now, teledocs, telemedicine. I would have never thought about having a telemed call with a doctor prior to COVID. Now I've had, half a dozen of them, right? And it's common. Or if you look at another one that came my way was, physical audits of manufacturing facilities for ISO certifications, for instance. well, how do you do a physical audit if no one's there, or if you're worried about the security? Well, now there's technology that I've seen where you put a 360-degree camera in a building, and the auditor can control it remotely through a secure connection and look around and zero in and zoom and look at what they need to look at. So, there's just exciting to think the kinds of technology and solutions that are going to come out to support all this. So, as typical with me, I'm an optimist. I just look forward to what every new day brings in terms of solutions, and I think the flexibility to embrace them is going to be the key.
Anything else anyone want to add to that? Okay, let's go to Q&A. Thank you, panel, for some informative dialogue, some great takeaways. So let's go ahead and start fielding some questions from the audience. And as a reminder to the audience, you can still submit questions using the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So our first question, let's go here. Okay, the pandemic has taught us that today's risks are different from yesterday's. Do you have any predictions for tomorrow's risks? Why don't we start with Howard?
Sure, Bob. Yeah, this again, it's one of those invisible elephants in a room. I'm calling it political risk, and by that I don't mean who you vote for, what color hat you have in your hat stand. It's the risk of the authorities stepping in and disrupting our businesses. That risk is dramatically increased. I mean, we've always kind of had it. We've always had martial law and so forth, but this is kind of martial law on steroids. And I'm not saying I'm not necessarily against all of it, but the concept that at any point a governor or somebody or a bureaucrat can shut your business down, tell you people where to work, tell them how to work, tell them what medical procedures they need to follow, mandate firing of employees for not, especially in the public sector, firing employees for not submitting to this medical procedure, that medical procedure. None of that is written into our business continuity plans. So in Seattle, for example, they're going to lose over 50% of their police force from the highs of just 2 years ago. Now that has enormous implications for public safety and our civil society. So how do you plan for that? And who knows what's going to happen, what they'll think of next to do. So I think political risk is something that nobody's thinking about, and we're just going to be reacting to.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that because I agree, Howard, that's a huge area of risk. And I netted down to something I've always looked at, which is the single point of human failure. And as we think about processes and the way business is run, we have always, in business continuity, tried to identify, is there a single person who, if they were to hit the lottery or do whatever, they would stop our business. And now when you look at everyone being distributed or in vital positions, especially in a strained economic situation, there might be only one or two people who could do something. And now with these extra pressures to conform to some sort of governmental regulations, or even if they just choose to change positions, they're making organizations more vulnerable. And you don't have that sort of shadowing that goes on when you're not in the office. You don't have that ability to say, well, I think that person is, heading to retirement. Let's have someone work with them daily and pick their brain and let them learn. Now you have someone working at home who you don't know what they're doing at home. They could be printing every document you have on their home printer and, storing it up and ready to walk out the door virtually, so to speak. So that single point of human failure, I think, is the area of focus for a lot of business continuity professionals right now.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, unfortunately, the single point of failure is going to be as well as going to be the people in charge. I have a Silicon Valley-based client that cut my contract in half. This is kind of annoying. And I said, why? And they said, well, normally we use you for planning our back to work strategy or, return to office and what are the protocols and what do we need to worry about. But we're a California company. We're just going to do what Gavin Newsom tells us to do. So for good or for bad, I think for bad, a lot of American businesses' pandemic plans are being driven by politicians instead of people like us. And that's what I mean by political risk. And next time it's going to be on a much lower threshold. And the time after that will be a much lower threshold too.
Yeah, it is. And you just got me thinking there. So when you think of California and some of what I would call extremes that were implemented by the government out there to make things happen, those weren't necessarily the same things that were happening in Georgia, right? So if I have a pandemic plan and I'm trying to cover risk of absenteeism or whatever you want to call it when something like that's happening, my plan doesn't apply to Georgia at the same time it applies there. So now I'm dealing with, juggling two different scenarios. And if, you can really, at this point, we have 50 states. I mean, that's just the United States. And there's a lot of rules and things that were happening with work councils and whatnot overseas. So the risk of having to comply with so many things that are almost impossible to comply with because they come in a different shape and form, no matter where you are, to me is a future risk. I mean, I know we've all dealt with regulations in the past. If you're in the financial sector, you've probably dealt with the SEC or conversely, maybe to the FCA in Europe or somewhere, and they're different rules. You can satisfy some of the same things across the board with some of those regulations. It didn't seem to pan out that way with the pandemic. We had to have different run books, for lack of better terms, for virtually every place that we operated, and it was rough with a small staff.
And to that point, I think the issue from Howard's point is, what used to be pragmatic actions politically are now simply political actions with no pragmatism. You're in situations now where it may or may not make sense, but it's party aligned or it's politics. And as a result, at the end of the chain, we get whipsawed based on, who's in power and what they said yesterday. And knowing full well that it may shift back the other way in 2 or 4 years because it never made sense in the first place, but yet you had to comply and then rearrange the dots and such that you comply with the next round. And that gets tough.
Mm-hmm. Well, some great observations. I'm sorry, Mike. Michael, do you want to add something?
I was just gonna add one more piece that we had a lot of conversations with HR when we had people going with the whole political theme, right? Everybody, well, not everybody, most people have some sense of where they stand politically, and now there's such polarization that if there's any politics introduced into anything, you're going to split your staff right down the middle, and they'll start fighting with each other then. So now you have HR issues cropping up as well.
Yeah, it's very divisive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump to the next question submitted. Let's see. How do you see the traditional pandemic plan changing with what you experienced with COVID-19? Michael, you want to lead us off on that?
Yeah, sure. So hopefully everyone on the call has a pandemic plan, and if not, hopefully you're working to create one. And I think traditionally pandemic plans, they had triggers to activate them. And they can be heavily weighted, or at least the ones that I've built historically have been heavily weighted in the percentage of absenteeism and mandates by, or at least recommendations by health authorities such as the WHO or maybe their different stages of the pandemic. These are obviously great inputs, but they can't be the only triggers, I don't think, anymore. At Citrix, at least, we found that a few other inputs have to be part of it because it's a complex equation. Things like the local infiltration of the disease. There wasn't the same impact on all kinds of regions around the globe. But historically, I would have activated a pandemic plan and attempted to do things in places where maybe the disease wasn't quite as bad. I don't think that's going to be the way we're going to approach that going forward. It's going to be much more local instead of just a global rule. The ability of businesses, I think this was mentioned earlier too, how they operate locally too. So if you have if everybody in your building that happens to be in Raleigh, North Carolina, goes to the same place at lunch all the time, if that lunch place closes, it has an impact. But so do many other local places around, such as medical facilities, the availability of various schools, depending on where they are locally and how the disease is spreading. So I think those things are going to have to really detail out a lot more of the pandemic plans. And the triggers to deactivate the plan as well have historically been widely available, vaccines, that's usually something that deactivates the plan. And I don't know about anyone else on this call, but I can tell you that our plan at Citrix is not deactivated because there's a lot more that goes into it. What we see now, is as a valuable indicator, is signals, a possible return to normal, things like employee sentiment. right? We've taken a stance at Citrix that if you don't want to come back to the office, you don't have to. We're not mandating anybody comes back to the office, at least not right now. We have to gauge that through surveys and just to find out what the employee sentiment is. Supply chain backlog, how does that play into it? And even company transformations, a lot of people, at least now, I'm sure, are trying to look more to a cloud transformation and so on. So I think that just the triggers to deactivate a plan are going to also dramatically change once we get past this and write up all of our lessons learned.
Anyone like to add to that? All right, well, let's go to the next one. And this is kind of a long question, so bear with me a second. How will the COVID experience and the new normal affect day-to-day roles and activities of management? And what did the COVID experience surface regarding skills, expertise, talents that the BCDR practitioner needs to gain and or enhance? So Mark, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, and I think, Bob, the issue becomes that, like I mentioned earlier, management by walking around is kind of dead now. There isn't going to be any of that. And what that means, I think, is managers have to shift from supervisor/manager into leaders and focus more on the tasks and the output and the deliverables, the objectives, than the individuals themselves. Now, be there for the individual if things can't be achieved, but really set the milestones and the targets based on what the business needs. And that should always have been the case. But there isn't going to be that opportunity to listen to people, to Howard's point, the coffee clutch in the hallway and whatever else, where, hey, I'm a little bit behind on this, there's a problem with that. That's all going to have to be sussed out through, ongoing dynamic day-to-day in calls like this. And I think the managers now, like I say, have to be a little more, leaders have to be a little more directive in terms of what the targets are and be much more in assistance than they probably were in the past by engaging ongoing remotely. It's going to be tougher. And like I say, it's going to be clearer definitions. So for example, if you were writing a piece of software, you couldn't just say, okay, we'll talk about it as we meet day to day. No, it's got to be pretty well laid out and defined such that it's now a codable document for a programmer, because you're not going to have that chance to answer that question across the transom ongoing on a day-to-day basis. And you can't have that call every 5 minutes when that question comes up. So it's going to put a lot more structure, I think, into the environment.
If I could add, not the management piece, but the BCDR, professional piece, I think what I've seen as an observation is the way we engage our usual users is different now, because to some degree we're being deferential. We understand they're in a higher level of stress. Their roles are changing. They're sort of living in a disaster. So trying to talk to them about some abstract scenario that might happen is almost, you almost kind of feel foolish at times because they're living it as you speak. So I think what we have to do is use a lot of tact and a little bit more sort of building in lessons learned about business continuity planning into the day-to-day discussions, as opposed to trying to set up an exercise that simulates some sort of scenario, when in fact getting people to that exercise, that's the last thing in their mind. I think, well, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're in deep trouble, and you're worried about whether or not my server's going to go down. You have to worry about the server going down, but getting their attention. So I think we have to be a little bit better at understanding and recognizing the tone and tenor of what our audience is living through, and then find creative ways of sort of still engaging them without making it a very rigid process.
And Tim, if I could add to that, I think continuity as a concept is now at the forefront, but continuity professionals aren't necessarily, because it's now woven into the fabric in such a way that we can kind of, I don't want to say step back, but we can now carry water for the environment and support it in a different way, but not lead it, because we're not leading a continuity effort. We're assisting an environment that is in continuous continuity mode, and that to me means senior managers are now in continuity mode, whether they like it or not, and we're assisting them with what our knowledge and our understanding is, without the ego of being at that forefront.
Yeah. Both of you folks are talking about the soft skill. You know what, Michael? I stepped on you. I apologize.
Go ahead, Howard. Go ahead. You're good.
Yeah, the concept of the softer skills coming into center stage. I mean, as a consultant, I'm biased, but the skills for a successful consultant, I think, are going to matter as much or more as the skills for a successful technical practitioner of BCDR. So the competencies around like stakeholder management, relationship management, kind of to Tim's point, and yours too, Mark. Communications, how to up your game in communications. How do you market BCDR in a Zoom environment where you can't just walk down the hall like you were saying before? So the consulting softer skills, even anthropology, like this tribe of people that I'm now living with in business, they're going to be different. So softer skills, yes. How to do a BIA, not so much.
Yeah.
Michael, please go ahead.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Howard. I wasn't going to go as deep, but I was going to mention the communication piece because, we're at this point, we have the ear of our CEO, of everyone in the E-suite. They want to have a conversation, they want to ask questions, and where someone like me, I present to those people a lot based on various things that are going on, but I can't do it all the time. So people that may report to me or people who may not be used to doing that are going to start needing to acquire those skills of communication and the ability to sit in front of the most senior people in your organization and give a breakdown of what's going on and be very well versed in all of it. So, I know we all know what we're doing all the time, but to sit down in front of someone who could potentially, have your future in their hands and then try to articulate it can be hard if you're not used to that.
Right, especially communicating to them in their mother tongue, because as we know, the C-suite does not necessarily speak English; they speak exec speak. And Mark, your point of stepping back, that's actually being forced in a couple of instances. I know a number of colleagues that were let go in the rifts of the pandemic, and they were the pandemic people. And they're being let go because we have to riff. And besides, now everybody's working from home, so we don't need you anymore. I'm not sure that that's a favorable trend.
All right. Well, why don't we jump to the next question here? This kind of goes back to something we discussed just a bit earlier, and it asks, how do you best manage the sharing of institutional knowledge with this new distributed workforce? Anyone want to tackle that first?
Well, I think we use the term it's a two-way street, and I think, we have to make sure the people who are working remote are sharers and are willing to document things and put them in shared places so that it's available to everyone else. And the old day of just sort of having an office with all your stuff secured away and locked away, and you wait for someone to come ask for it. Those days are kind of gone. So I think, trying to get the knowledge is really, we have to hire and nurture the people who are willing to be collaborative and share it. And those people who aren't, as someone said earlier, are probably not going to succeed in this new model.
Okay. We got another question here. How have you found the internet service providers responded to the increased demand for service reliability when working from home?
Well, I can say one thing about that because I experienced it personally. I mean, the ISP that I have at my house, when this all started, they still had, data caps on everything you could do. And I'm certainly going to scale every one of those data caps by the time I'm online all the time. I think, like Mark said, playing my video game on the same computer now. I mean, I've introduced, streaming video because we're on Zooms and everything all the time. So I would have definitely scaled that. So what they did is got rid of those caps where I live. So it was a really, really beneficial, because otherwise I think you would have then started having the bottom line impacted by various companies, because I mean, it's really expensive when you start going over and they're charging you, I don't know, $50 a gig or whatever it is that you go over. Now my company's going to need to pay for that if they expect me to stream video all the time to work. So that's one of the benefits that I saw from ISP changes.
Anyone else? Okay, here's another question. How has your BCDR program changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, i.e. level of organizational visibility, reporting, staffing, funding, tools, practices, etc.? Tim, why don't you start us off on this one.
Well, our program changed both, from a cost perspective. We've changed a lot of our solutions, and we were able to drive down costs because, frankly, we didn't need to worry about work error recovery in the same fashion. So we were able to negotiate and work with some of our vendors to change the parameters of our agreements and lower costs. We also lost a couple of people from our program due to nice retirement packages that were offered. So we are definitely a leaner and smaller continuity program. But I think getting back to that other point, I think one of the things we had good relationships throughout the organization, so we were able to, again, get more in the listening mode, more of support mode, as opposed to trying to get them to comply to the next BCP review or the next DR plan review or the next exercise. It's much more organic. We're really just sort of trying to understand the way the organization's evolving and then kind of bolstering it, as opposed to trying to stick ourselves into it. So I think overall, even though we're smaller, I think the workload is a little smaller now, just because it's changing so much. There's less, it's hard to quantify, but there just seems to be less things to worry about when everyone is working from home. I mean, you have now a lot more people to worry about in individual places, but the notion that a building being down is going to impact, a day of work, that's just not there right now. Will it be when people come back? It might, but for the time being, we're just pretty much acting in more of a supporting mode.
In our case, our primary recovery strategy was work from home in the first place, but with a third-party alternate support environment in case we could not work from home. So what this did was it reaffirmed, the need to work from home and beefed it out. Now, prior to COVID, we had situations where, we would validate that people could work from home, VPN test in, spend some time there, et cetera. And it wasn't universal. It was most of the organization, but you always had situations where somebody didn't have the infrastructure or a manager said, I really don't need all my people, et cetera. Well, the dynamic shifts a little bit. Suddenly, I'll pick a number, maybe 10% of the 20% of the workforce is not able to work from home and didn't need to validate. Now that same 10% or so is idle in a real production situation, and that's unacceptable. So the problem of making sure that you could test with everybody confirming that they could do their job became a non-problem because you had to have people working from home all the time. So the recovery situation almost got leapfrogged by the day-to-day production situation, and now we're better at recovery than we could ever be because recovery is production.
Yeah, I have a client that has a huge presence in India, and it's a shared service kind of an organization. And they swore up and down that they couldn't do their work from home. They had a dozen really good reasons why they couldn't work from home, and they needed something else. And then COVID comes to shore, and within 72 hours, the organization that couldn't work from home for 12 good reasons is working from home.
All right. Well, this is sort of something we talked about earlier and sort of an add-on to what Howard just mentioned. How do you monitor privacy for an at-home employee?
I think you don't. I think that people should be responsible for their own privacy. I am totally against tattleware. That is a really horrible way to monitor privacy. I think that, Mark was right. Work from home. Your home is your office, and your office is your home. Your home is also your castle, and maybe there should be security implications, making sure that you're only using company assets for company work, and you enforce it by policy, making sure that if you're using personal assets, that you do have antivirus, that it is updated, that you are ensuring patching and things like that. But that's security, and that's very different from privacy. I don't think it's a company's business to ensure Mark Carroll or Tim Matthews or Michael Ullman's privacy. But maybe I'm an outlier.
Well, those are two different terms. I agree with you. If the true meaning of the question was privacy, I would take your stance completely. I don't think it's the company's business to worry about my privacy. But if they worry about my security, I could understand that. And even in situations where you may have maybe an executive lives in a high rise and they live next door to someone, and now you can hear the financial conversation through the wall, who's on the other side of the wall. There's really no way to monitor that. Only one-by-one conversations with people to find out where they live and what type of information they have. And we've talked about internally at the office, we need to start classifying potentially the security risk, if you will, of the content of what people work on. And there may be some actions that we can take, whether that be, supporting what's supplying people internet, so we can make sure that that's secure or not, or where they live. Like I just mentioned, if there's a thin wall between them and someone else. We have not breached that topic with anyone other than just brainstorming ideas of what we could potentially do. But I agree with you, Howard. I think at least from our level of readiness where I work now, we do not need to go down that path until we have a better idea of what we're doing.
Yeah, I took the question around a little bit. And if you're requiring me to work using my own tools, my own technology, then the firm has a responsibility to help me maintain my own privacy. So it isn't a question of you monitoring what I do from a privacy perspective. It's a question of saying, your privacy has been increasingly exposed by the nature of what we're asking you to do. And here is how we as an organization will protect you, not monitor you, protect you.
Like, for example, give me an example, Mark.
Well, for example, I've got a, let's say I've got a VPN in, and that VPN's got to be secure because, I may put information in through my own activity that's got my SSN in it or something, right? The firm needs to be able to tell me that that's a secure channel and ensure it's a secure channel, because now I'm using it not just for work activity, but for personal, and because it's one device, it's one footprint. And I've got you now asking me to open a door that it needs to be open to do the work of the company, but also opens a door to other things on my end.
Yeah, brings a whole.
Yeah, so that's a fair point. I mean, I used to have my PIN was the last 4 digits of my social security number, but I wanted a stronger PIN, so I use all 9 now.
I love it.
Well, it brings up the whole question of work-life balance. I think there used to be able to go to work and you wouldn't expect to have privates because you were at the company. And then when you went home, you expected privacy because you were now turning the switch and working from home. But now, it's 24/7. You're literally kind of in both worlds simultaneously. And I think these are, interesting points. If you're doing banking transactions, on one device and work on the other, but they won't come up through the same internet connection. Again, there's a whole issue there. So privacy is a challenge.
All right, I think we're just about out of time. So again, if we didn't get to your question, you see the panelists and their contact information up on the screen. So feel free to reach out to them. Again, thank you, Mark, Mike, Howard, and Tim for a great dialogue. Thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, a review of work from home strategies. On behalf of the panel, our staff, and our sponsor, SAI 360, thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. And above all, please continue to stay safe. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.